Hello, I'm Orkhan Amashov. Welcome to Context on A News. After being chastised by US President Donald Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance in the Oval Office, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has been very warmly received in the UK's capital and granted a royal audience as well. And European leaders who gathered for the Lancaster summit on Sunday reiterated their support for Ukraine, for its territorial integrity as well. And also, of course, it should be mentioned that apart from reiterating their support for Kyiv at the Lancaster House summit, on Sunday's summit, although Sunday's summit was not pre-planned, it wasn't a diary before Trump-Zelenskyy spat after the epic collapse of the US-Ukraine talks, the importance attached to its immediate implications has now assumed an augmented sense of criticality, with a role to be played by the United Kingdom as a bridge between Europe and Washington, and also between Trump and Zelenskyy becoming even more essential. At the news conference shortly after the meeting of leaders, Keir Starmer unveiled what is known as a four-point plan, which reiterates the importance of keeping military aid flowing into Ukraine and increasing the economic pressure on Russia. The plan also states that any lasting peace must ensure Ukraine's sovereignty and security, with Kyiv being present at any peace talks, and that in the event of a deal agreed, what is to become a coalition of the willing should boost Ukraine's defensive capabilities to deter any further attack, defend a deal and guarantee peace afterwards. Of course, needless to say, this plan will need to be presented to the US so as to be taken forward together. Prime Minister Starmer, who is presently treading a tightrope, navigating between competing considerations of keeping President Trump and also happy and also helping Ukraine in a meaningful way, stated that US was an reliable ally, suggesting that America was at least not opposed to the UK leading work on a plan for peace. Of course, it's another question whether the United States will go along with the proposed plan. US Secretary of State Marco Rubio stated that a certain European foreign minister told him that the war in Ukraine should go on for another year with the hope of weakening Russia to the point where it would beg for peace. So far as one can tell, on the basis of rhetoric emanating from the White House, this conjecture is viewed as wholly implausible by the officials in the United States. And today I'm delighted to be joined by John Kowalik, Senior Editor at Outcome Modeling Analysis Issue Insight, who currently happens to be in Kiev, Ukraine, and Lyuba Shipovich from Dignitas Organization, joining from Kiev, Ukraine. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Mr. Kowalik, how hopelessly dramatic is Zelensky's predicament now?
Yeah, unfortunately, President Zelenskyy and senior members of the government of Ukraine didn't follow the guidance that they were presented in advance of the meeting with President Trump. And the result is what we now see, where we've taken a detour back to where we were always going to be. And that was President Trump has focused on one aspect of the Russian-Ukraine war, and that is the ceasefire. He hasn't focused on a just peace, a lasting peace. His focus is singular and it's linear and it's easy to understand. I'm not necessarily saying he's right or wrong, but that's his track. And so where we were was President Zelenskyy had an opportunity to say to President Trump, go ahead, see if you can get President Putin to agree with it, then we'll see what happens. And he didn't. And then we cycled to London with Prime Minister Starmer and his efforts. And again, coming out of it, somewhat unconfirmed, but coming out of it is a discussion of a ceasefire in some form. And so, unfortunately, we've added some time, we've added some drama. It's going to take some time to repair. But in the end, the European Union, NATO members are going to follow the U.S. lead, and the U.S. lead is going to continue to be a singular focus, first on a ceasefire, and then everything after that. But security guarantees as a component of the ceasefire, you're really not going to see them in any structural way.
I see. Liba, so what is the feeling in Kyiv after Zelensky being chastised by President Trump and Vice President Vance? And also he was warmly received in the UK with European leaders reiterating their support for Ukraine, with this 4-point plan being presented as well. What is the feeling there? I mean, Mr. Kabelik said that so we're moving in, it's probably in the right direction, but it was what happened on Friday was a major setback. So we're losing time, actually.
Okay. So in my circle, between like military units, charity organization, we see the main in miscommunication is radically different views on the war. President Trump reiterated that he's a businessman and he sees this war and ceasefire as a business deal. Like for us, on the other hand, it's not a business, it's a matter of our survival. So we cannot consider this as a business deal, and we cannot apply business rules to any negotiations with Russia. For business, ceasefire, temporary ceasefire is a victory, but for Ukraine, we are actually looking for last long and peace because we had experience of Russia not keeping their words, and every ceasefire only gave some preferences to Russia to actually stabilize the economy, to spend more money on economy.
Do you still agree that a temporary ceasefire, not a proper peace agreement, but just temporary ceasefire, is something should be regarded as number one target, imminent target?
Only if European countries and United States want to release sanctions. Because if they want to even to release sanctions in exchange of ceasefire, we would just make Russia more stronger. We would allow them to use the frozen assets to put into the war machine, invest them in the war army, and manufacture more drones, more armored vehicles, and so on. So we will just make Russia strong. We allow them to take a pause and become stronger.
Mr. Kabelik, what is the likelihood that the US support, military support for Ukraine, will decrease from now on? And bearing in mind what President Trump said during that historic fire exchange on Friday, he said to President Zelensky that Ukraine's major asset, major strength is linked with US support. He said that you don't have cards. With you do have cards, and the fact that you do have cards is not being sort of properly used by you, so it's not contributing to the peace. Do you think that actually US could be expected to pressure other European countries to decrease support in Ukraine as well? I know it sounds like a wild conjecture, but still I thought that it might be a good question to put to you.
Yeah, it's somewhat counterintuitive. President Trump looks at his threats toward NATO in terms of the U.S. could leave NATO, NATO members should spend more, and the European Union should spend more, and European countries should spend more with respect to Ukraine and defense in general. So when what happened on Friday becomes a change by the coalition of the willing, as Prime Minister Starmer said on Sunday, the larger European Union, as Ursula von der Leyen, the president of the European Commission, said, and then as individual NATO members have said, President Trump looks at as a victory because he says, great, they're going to spend more, they're going to have more of a commitment, they're looking at security guarantees as their primary responsibility rather than the US. So from him, he chalks up those three wins. And from the perspective of Ukraine, West was saying is absolutely right in terms of the potentialities from a ceasefire allow a lot of things to potentially happen. And during a ceasefire, would the Russian Federation use that time to reconfigure commercially, economically, politically, financially? Sure. Would Ukraine do the same? Yes. The Trump-Vance administration, though, is looking at this, again, narrowly and rather than expansively, and they're saying, what can we really control? We can't control what President Putin does during a ceasefire. It's almost impossible. So therefore, what can we control? We can get him to say, this date, this time, you stop firing. President Zelensky, you stop firing. And then both of you use that time where people aren't getting killed to move to the next stages. Maybe we don't get very far in the next stages, but at least the killing is stopped and we move forward. So that's how he's looking at it. And with respect to what the U.S. is looking to provide or how it's looking, the U.S. may very well spend less. You will definitely have rhetoric about spending less. But will the rhetoric and the reality come to match? That's going to be determined what happens within Europe. On the 6th of March, there's going to be a European Union summit, and then we'll sort of see what happens. But this is going to be unraveling very quickly over the next 3 to 4 weeks.
So, Liba, as part of a wider support for Ukraine, Britain also announced additional, I think, £1.6 billion of UK export finance to buy more than 5,000 air defence missiles, and also there was a £2.2 billion loan as well. So there is a sufficient element of European support for Ukraine, and European countries are talking about further isolation of Russia as well. But assuming that there's only European support and with US support decreasing exponentially, how long do you think Ukraine will be able to plod on?
Of course, we are very thankful to the UK for their leadership and promising 5,000 air defense missiles. However, it's still unclear how immediate the support will be. As I know, it's agreed that these 5,000 missiles will be delivered to Ukraine by 2030, so during 5 years, while we are in huge need of air defense right away, and especially if US will slow down they support. Ukraine had experience of pauses in US support. The last one happened during first months of the last year, and Ukraine paid really high prices lives of our citizens, of Ukraine. So we need Europe to step up even more and take more leadership, and also convince US that strong Ukraine means strong US. Specifically, Ukrainian army is one of the strong in Europe right now. So, it's a security guarantee for the entire Europe and for NATO, that Ukrainian army will protect NATO countries.
Mr. Kavlik, Mr. Rubio said that the European plan that was presented to the United States, we're not talking about a 4-point plan, but the previous plan, they were not realistic. But you mentioned about this ceasefire first and then proper peace agreement later. Am I right to assume that the territorial concessions for security guarantees is a sort of a central ingredient around which negotiations are going to revolve? Because it is very clear from the rhetoric emanating from the White House that Ukraine will not be able to recover its full territorial integrity. And some Ukrainians are actually saying that territorial concessions are not entirely unlikely. So there is a sense of admission that we feel when we talk to Ukrainian colleagues as well. And we also understand that security guarantees, when it comes to security guarantees, even the European boots on the ground, so far not acceptable to Russia. So this talk about mineral steel and that American workers being on the ground being viewed as an inceptional element of the wider security guarantee infrastructure. So the question is very simple. All of this, are they actually revolving around territorial concessions for security guarantees?
The reality is is no. The rhetoric, yes, but the Trump-Vance administration has internally determined that it is incredibly unlikely that the armed forces of the Russian Federation are going to be directed by President Vladimir Putin to give up what they've got. When you look at Kursk as an example of what the Ukrainians have been able to create within the territory of Russia, the Russians have clawed back some of that, but Ukrainians are still in Russian territory. And President Zelenskyy has said, that, well, we'll use that as a somewhat of a bargaining chip, maybe to get some territory back. The Russian response has been, stay there. We really don't care. You're spending a lot of time, a lot of money, a lot of troops. We've got North Koreans helping us and dying for us. Not a real big deal. And that's one of the problems where for one country, Ukraine, it's very important to get territory back. And for the Russians, it's very important to keep what they've got. But the fact is, as politicians like to say, the reality's on the ground. It's much harder to force someone out of your house than to get into the house. And so I think that, we're going to continue to see as, the rhetoric about the importance of territory. But in the end, how this is likely to end is with the Russians keeping pretty much what they have, allowing Ukrainians to go back and forth, dual citizenship, dual working, ease of crossing borders, prisoner exchanges. But that's sort of the easy stuff. Then you get to the rest of it outside of the ceasefire, which is issues relating to the $320 billion in central bank assets, the reparations for all of the war crimes that Russian troops committed in Bucha, north of Kiev, and in other areas. All of that's going to take an awful lot of time. And that's why the Trump-Vance administration is saying, how can we tee up a win quickly? President Trump is all about winning quickly. So I think that's where we're going to be.
Ruba, what are your reflections on this debate and conversation? About a quick win for the time being, and then thrashing out everything later.
I fully agree with what that it's not going to be a quick win, and also speaking about prisoners of war, we have to remember that Russia kidnapped a lot of Ukrainian children, and they're not considered as prisoners of war because they're just children, and they mostly their parents were killed by Russians, so there no one to step up for them, and as a country, Ukraine has to remember about these kids and bring them back, while Russia even doesn't recognize that they kidnapped all these children. And same with rebuilding Ukrainian cities. We need really tough on our requirements to Russia. If it's a temporary ceasefire, then we don't want Russia to spend money from frozen assets from the economy on increasing war manufacture, but rather we want this money to be used for rebuilding of Ukrainian cities.
Thank you. Mr. Kabelik, we all understand that without the active participation of the United States, no deal will be attained. The Europeans are fully conscious of this reality. Of course, the UK has a certain role to play, but after all, this plan will be presented to the United States. And the question here is that we have heard on the grapevine different pieces of information coming our way suggests that President Zelenskyy could actually be somewhat very nicely compelled to apologize to Mr. Trump. What is the likelihood of this probability, and how central is this going to be the further positive US involvement in Ukrainian affairs?
100% probable, 100% required, and he's already attempted to do it, but he's having a challenge doing it. And I'm not criticizing him. From his perspective, He doesn't believe he needs to apologize. However, from the political perspective, from Donald Trump's perspective, and I'm separating Donald Trump from his office of President of the United States. Donald Trump, the person, this is how he operates. He loves flattery, but anything he perceives as a criticism is embellished in his mind 3, 4, 5,000%. And so for President Zelenskyy, the challenge is going to be not necessarily walking back what happened, because that's seized or it's seared in Trump's mind. So that's not going to change. But Trump's going to want to see a groveling. Trump's going to want to see a genuflection in front of him. And that's going to be tough for President Zelenskyy. But in the end, he's going to end up doing it. And one other challenge already has been, as he tries to do this in some of the media discussions he's had, and some of the brief statements he's had since Friday, including in an interview with Fox News on Friday evening in Washington, D.C., he's tried to make the statements, but then he'll say, we've always had gratitude. We've always been appreciative. And those of us that were in Vilnius at the NATO summit remember the national security advisor at the time, Jake Sullivan, Biden administration, the foreign minister of the UK, both saying there needs to be some gratitude.
Yep, yeah.
And we need to see thank you for taxpayers. So this is all still going to gel out.
I remember Ben Wallace saying a bit of gratitude wouldn't hurt.
But
since you
we're
mentioned,
not Amazon.
Yeah, since you mentioned UK Defence Secretary, I would like to ask a very brief question about the special relationship, transatlantic alliance. What we observed just very recently, last week, at the UN, first at the General Assembly, later at the Security Council, United States sided with Russia against the United Kingdom. Nothing of the kind had happened before that. How do you evaluate the current nature and level of the special relationship, and do you think this relationship institutionally is central to the mindset of President Donald Trump, who is a very, very different person, to put it mildly?
You know, for President Trump, the special relationship is special on any given day, but it cannot be special on any given day. And so for Prime Minister Starmer, when he was in the Oval Office with President Trump, for President Macron of France, when he was in the office, they had moments that were positive moments in front of the cameras. But any relationship that President Trump has can literally go off the political rails. But then it also has an opportunity to come back. And that's the good news for President Zelenskyy. We've seen President Trump say, I have great relationship with President Xi of China, but then COVID hit. But now I'm back in office and I have a good relationship with him. I had a good relationship with Putin. He didn't attack Ukraine when I was in office. He attacks when Biden's office. Now I have a good relationship with him. So he constantly does that. And so for President Zelenskyy, the good news is that if President Trump feels he's gotten his pound, he's gotten his apology, he'll move on. And so the question now is, you look at the United Nations and the vote in the Security Council, the vote in the General Assembly, really stunning, as you pointed out, who voted with, who voted against. But unfortunately, and this was something President Erdogan of Turkey has said, when he talks about the Security Council saying, the world's greater than 5, but he also made a statement some years ago, and he said, as long as a country is subject to a Security Council resolution or a General Assembly resolution and they ignore it, the UN is basically toothless. And so that's what we saw last week. The Trump administration looks at it. It was a moment in a series of moments, but nothing to get too excited about, because it goes to the greater agenda, which is for President Trump. I want to repair the bilateral relationship between the U.S. and Russia, because we've got a lot of other things that are frankly more important than Ukraine.
I see. Liba, President Zelensky, well, after what happened in the Oval Office last Friday, of course, it was a very, very bad sort of dressing down by many estimates. The negotiations collapsed. The mineral deal was supposed to be signed, has not been signed yet. But also, I think he received some positive sort of boost as well, positive reaction from some Ukrainians as well. We know that three-point plan, which was discussed immediately after the first US-Russia talks and contacts, involved the new elections in Ukraine. What is the popularity degree enjoyed by President Zelensky now in Kiev and the outskirts of the Kiev and in the country on the whole?
First of all, as far as I know, negotiation talks are still happening. So after Friday meeting at the White House, when President Zelensky left the United States, but working group and officials are still in Washington, D.C. Working on the deal. So I won't say the question is closed already. Ukraine is still working, and as we saw in Trump's later words, he would be ready to sign minerals agreement if the president will come back with a new offer.
Thank you, Luba. Thank you very much. Sorry. Please, your last words, and we're going to finalize them. Sorry.
Yes, as for feeling, I think Ukraine is even more united right now. We know that we should rely on ourselves, and it's also boost for our Ministry of Defense to invest more in Ukrainian.
Thank you, Liba. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Thank you very much indeed to both of you. I'm so grateful to both of you. This was John Kavalich joining from Kiev, Ukraine, and Luba Shipovich of Dignitas Organization, also joining from the self-same city. We discussed the latest talks involving Ukraine, the Oval Office encounter between President Zelensky and Trump, and some other related developments indeed. See you very soon.